I have heard of a land.
Wonderful story of love.
Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing His mercy and His grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, He'll prepare for us a place.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a
day of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory. While we walk the pilgrim pathway, clouds will overspread the sky. But when traveling days are over, not a shadow, not a sign.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a
day of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory. Let us then be true and faithful, trusting, serving every day. Just one glimpse of Him in glory will the toils of life repay.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a
day of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory. Onward to the prize before us, soon His beauty will behold. Soon the pearly gates will open, we shall tread the streets of gold.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a
day of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory. I am weak, but Thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to Thee. Just a closer walk.
So Genesis, we're in the big block of Abraham's story that started back in chapter 12 and goes all the way through chapter 25. We are in particularly a section now dealing in chapters 18 and 19 with Sodom and Gomorrah, a story that I think most people are familiar with, but a lot of the significant parts of these two chapters don't get talked about much, and I hope that we can talk about those things some. We are going to revisit the map here, and so we finally made it to point 10 on this map, and recall back in chapter 13, Abraham and Lot have come back from Egypt. They're so numerous, and their servants are so numerous, and their livestock so numerous. There is beginning to be some animosity between Abraham's servants and Lot's servants, and so they decide to part ways. When they separated, Lot was given the choice. Lot went to the east. Where he went, it says, as he chose the Jordan Valley. So this is the Jordan River. It goes right down through here. And obviously on both sides of this river is valley land, like anywhere else where you have a river, the land goes to the river. But particularly this side, the east side of the Jordan River, is very good pasture land. He saw that. Where that magenta colored box is where most scholars believe that the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were probably located. What the text says is that he went as far as Sodom to the east to settle. So we're looking at the far eastern edges of the Jordan Valley. And we think of this right here, of course, let me get rid of that box, is the Dead Sea. And what do we think of when we think of the Dead Sea? Yeah, dead. And so we might have questions, and possibly should have questions, as to why this area was viewed as being such a great area. Well, we're told in verse 10 of chapter 13 that this being before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities of the valley, it was quite different. That it was Eden-like. And so I think it's probably fair to say that it was not yet a Dead Sea, it was not yet a salt sea, that happened as a result of the destruction that came to the valley. We do know even as late as when the children of Israel entered into this area, however, that all of this area up in here was very, very green and good pasture land. Even, years later, we read about that in Numbers 32, and then the end of that story is in Joshua 22, where it's, Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, I think, are the three tribes. As they were getting ready to cross over into the Jordan and fight the war, they were like, hey, this is good land, and we raise sheep. Can we just have this land? And you'll recall Moses said, well, yeah, God says you can have this land, but you have to go over and fight the war. You can't just settle here and not fight while your brothers go and fight. And so when you get to Joshua 22, that is where Joshua is releasing them to go back and resettle in that area on the east side of the Jordan River. He says, you've kept your word. You did what you said you would do when Moses made the promise to you. And so now you can go back and settle in that land. So even as late as that time, all of that area was still very fruitful. Apparently, it went all the way down through that whole valley region before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so that is what's going on there. And then, of course, Abraham, it says, goes to Canaan. He goes to the left or to the west. And he settled in Hebron. Verses 12 and 18 of chapter 13 tell us that he settled near the oaks of Mamre, which were in Hebron. And so that's kind of the layout for the events that we're going to read about in 18 and 19, is this area down here, Edom and Moab and all of this area going up along the east side of the Jordan River is where Lot and his servants and his sheep and goats and flocks and all are. And then this area over in Canaan is where Abraham is. And that's kind of the geography of the situation. So the chapter begins, the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre. Okay, that's significant. That word Lord, what is that? There's an anglicized Hebrew word that actually is translated Lord by most of these modern translations. Some of the really modern ones actually go back to the anglicized Hebrew word, which is Jehovah. Okay, so this is Jehovah. Jehovah appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre. That is an important statement. And we will talk about that more in a moment. But I want you to kind of be aware of that. So he's sitting there. It's the middle of the day. It says he lifted up his eyes in verse 2, and he looked, and behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. Okay, that's a significant statement as well. So just take note that we're told at the outset that the Lord appeared to Abraham, and there are 3 men that appear. And this is where Abraham, of course, does exactly what a hospitable person would do. He jumps up. He says, let's bring some water so you guys can wash your feet. That was just a proper thing to do, to provide people the means to freshen up after a long travel. Bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves, that you may go on. Since you visited your servant, they said, so do as you said. So Abraham hurries into the tent, and he tells Sarah, he says, quickly prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, make bread cakes. He runs to the herd. He takes a tender and choice calf. He gives it to the servant, and he says, hurry up and prepare it. Now, when I read or hear someone say, well, let me just get you a little snack. You need a piece of bread. I'm not thinking start the slaughtering process and roasting process, but apparently he's expecting them to stay a while. And he's going to prepare them a proper and choice meal. He took curds and milk and the calf which had been prepared and placed it before them. Okay, so what is curds? Cheese. So you take milk and you make it into curds, and that's what they make cheese with. Possibly this is early stage kind of goat cheese with goat's milk. Maybe it is some other type of cheese, but more than likely that's what we're talking about. It's the little crumble pieces. It may be soft. It may not be completely processed and dried out and aged, but that's what we're talking about. He's got meat, he's got cheese, he's got bread, and he's got milk for them to eat. They
I don't know whether that's any big significant matter or not, but it doesn't mention anything like that in the King James version. Needed for cakes.
Yeah, look over in verse 8. And what's it say? Yeah.
Yeah, he took the butter and the milk and
Yeah.
calf.
And I'm not real sure that butter's the right word there. I think curds is probably the right word there. So he made a full meal for them. That's the point. And they say, where's Sarah, your wife? Now, this really ought to trigger something. Unless he happened to say, hey, I'm Abraham, and my wife's not here, but her name is Sarah, which we have none of that recorded. They asked for his wife by name. How'd they know her name? God knows everything. That's right. And who's visiting Abraham? The Lord. Now, does Abraham know that at this point? No. He sees 3 men. And they asked for Sarah. He said, she's in the tent. Verse 10, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. Sarah was listening at the tent door, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing. Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I have become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also. And the Lord said to Abram, okay, who's doing the communicating here? the Lord. Why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I indeed bear a child when I'm so old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. I want you to understand that the only person who has the authority and power to make this promise a reality, to make such a statement, is who? The Lord. That's it. Nobody else can do it. I can't go to somebody's house and say, hey, you're going to have a child. I'm going to come back this time next year, and you are going to have a child. I'm going to make it so. Nobody can do that except God. Sarah denied it. She denied laughing because she was afraid, it says. And so she kind of got called out. Why'd you laugh? And she, I didn't laugh. That's nothing new. People have been doing that forever. If you got kids and grandkids and you say, why did you do that? They say, I didn't do that. And you know good and well that they had to do it. Don't be surprised, because that's what people do. And that's what she did. And he said, no, but you did laugh. Then the men rose up from there and looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send them off. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Now that's an echo from the promise that the Lord had already made to Abraham, right? We read about that promise earlier. I have chosen him in order that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, in order that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. And so he looks at, they're getting ready to leave. They look towards Sodom, and the Lord says to his companions, we need to let Abraham know what's going on. The Lord said, verse 20, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to his outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know. All right, there's a couple things we want to observe. Who are we dealing with? The Lord. We are dealing with one who has the power to make Abraham into a great nation. We are dealing with one who has the power to make a very advanced in age Abraham and a past childbearing Sarah have a child. We are dealing with the Lord who knew who Abraham's wife was before Abraham had introduced them. Where has she been, by the way? When he asked about that a little bit earlier, Abraham said, well, she's back in the tent. What has she been doing ever since they showed up? Cooking. She was back making the bread. And so they haven't met her yet, but yet this man knows who she is, what her name is, that she's going to have a child. That's who we're dealing with. Does he really have to go down to Sodom to see if it's as bad as he thinks it is? No. So what is he doing? Why is he handling it this way? It's not by accident. I'm sorry? It's for Abraham and for us. What he's going to be doing is he's going to demonstrate the breadth of his patience in dealing with man. Just how patient is God? You ever had that question? Just how patient is God? At what point does God say, you know what, enough is enough, and my patience is spent? And then how does he handle it when he gets to that point? Well, I'll remind you, we've already studied one section, right? When he looked down upon the earth and only evil was continually in the mind of man, and it repented God that he had made man on the earth, and he said, I'm not going to strive with man forever. And then he said, what? In 120 years, I'm going to judge him. So he was already out of patience. And he still gave 120 years for one family to do what's necessary in order to be saved. That's how patient God is. That's how long God will wait. What we're going to see in the last half of this chapter is a demonstration of just how broad and how deep God's patience in dealing with man goes. The men turned away from there, went towards Sodom while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. Yes, sir.
If you would, mind back up and read what you're reading, the text on the two paragraphs preceding where you are now, when the men turned away. Just before that, what the Lord is saying in your
Verses 20 and 21.
yeah.
The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know. All right. So they start to leave, but Abraham is still with the Lord, it says. So Abraham approaches the Lord in verse 23 and says, "Wilt thou indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" And so what is Abraham saying? There's got to be somebody there that's worth saving. Are you going to sweep away all the righteous people with the wicked people? Which is, I think, a normal human kind of response. And it also shows, what did Abraham not know? Just how bad it was. He had no idea how bad it was. He assumed that there must be what? There's got to be some good people down there. Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Wilt thou indeed sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of 50 righteous who are in it? Now, by the way, 50 righteous in a city, not really a big number. Really not. Are we a huge percentage of this city? No. And we got more than 50 people that are associated with this local church.
But you know, Mike, along that point there, you can also consider, at least I do, what's going on in the United States right now in relationship to what's going Sodom and Gomorrah, the unrighteousness that was going on, and what's not going right in our nation now. So instead of looking at Lafayette and the few that are righteous in Lafayette, look at the United States and how few and how many are.
Yeah.
Wonder to what extent and what patience is the Lord going to have for us as a nation.
I understand. And it goes further. God is going through this exercise not for God. God knows the condition. God knows what he's going to do. He knows what's going to happen. He knows the end from the beginning. He knows who's going to be delivered and who's not going to be delivered. He knows that Lot's wife isn't going to make it out. He knows that. This isn't for him. This is for Abraham and for us, for everybody that reads this after it's recorded by Moses, so that we see the depth and the breadth of the grace of God and how patient he is at dealing with man and how willing he is to save even the few. He spared Noah and his sons and their wives, 8 people from the earth, because Noah found favor. And this is the discussion with Abraham. Hey, what if there's 50 righteous people? Will you save the city for 50? God says, sure. I'll save the city for the 50. Notice verse 25, because it's going to be, well, I've talked about it. So we'll go ahead and have the conversation now, I guess. Notice verse 25. Far be it from thee to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from thee. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? The judge of all the earth. Who's the judge of all the earth? Okay, God. And do we know anything more specifically than to answer just generically God? Turn to the Gospel of John real quick. The Gospel of John chapter 5 and verse 22. I'm going to actually back up to verse 19 and read through verse 22. So Jesus said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, that the Son does likewise. For the Father loves the Son, shows him all that he himself is doing, and greater works than these he will show him, so that you may marvel. For as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, so also the Son gives life to whom he will. Look at verse 22. The Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son. So we see from time to time in the Scriptures where there are theophanies, appearances of God, and those appearances very often are attributed to the one who would become the incarnate Christ. Okay, this is before he was in the flesh, before he lived as a man. But we have the Lord that is having this conversation, and he's specifically identified as the one who is going to judge all the earth. And then Jesus, while he was on the earth, actually taught people, hey, the Father judges no one, but has given me judgment of all. So what we have here in these three people apparently are two angels, and we'll explain in a moment why I believe that two of them are angels, and a theophany of the Lord, a pre-incarnate manifestation of Jesus. There's another one that's really, really famous and very clearly outlined in the Bible. In 1 Corinthians, it talks about the children of Israel when they were going through the wilderness. They were supplied water and bread, and the rock, it says, was Christ. So Christ was present with them in their wilderness wandering. It was before he was manifest in the flesh, before he came in the person of Jesus, before he was born or begotten, but it was the person of the Godhead who had been active at creation, John chapter 1, who I think probably was the Lord who appeared as the burning bush to Moses and spoke to him. It's also very often throughout the Old Testament that it talks about the angel of the Lord, and then the angel of the Lord speaks in the first person about himself as being God. I think that those are probably manifestations of the pre-incarnate Christ. And that's what we have going on here. And it becomes a little bit more clear when we get to the beginning of the next chapter, because when they get to Sodom, it's no longer three men, but it's what? Two men. The Lord's not there. The Lord was just there communicating with Abraham. And so that's what's going on here. And that is how Abraham is talking with God. And we could say what? Bargaining with God. So the 50 goes down to what? Eventually works its way down. It steps down. It's 45 in verse 28. And then when he says okay, in verse 30, it turns into 30. And the Lord says okay. And it works its all the way down. And he says, okay, if I find 10 righteous souls, I'll spare the whole place Were there 10 righteous souls? No. There's a pretty good argument that there was only one. There were 3 that were spared. But there's a really good argument that there's only one who's truly righteous. I know Lot's righteous because the Bible declares him so. His 2 daughters followed him out of the city and followed all the instructions that they received. We're going to read that in a moment. But they clearly didn't have as much faith as Lot because of how they reacted on the backside of this. Now, we shouldn't be too hard on them. We're going to talk about that a little bit too when we get there. The circumstances were extremely traumatic, and the choices that they made make sense when you look at things from a physical perspective. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. But that's what's going on here. How patient is God? How gracious is God? Well, God says, okay, I want to tell you, Abraham, this is what I'm fixing to do. And Abraham, presumably, because he knows this is where Lot is, says, well, are you really going to destroy the whole city because there are righteous people there? And he says, what about 50? And God says, okay, 50 will work. Okay, well, if 50 is good, how about 45? Well, okay, 45. Well, if 45 is good, how about 30? And then down and down, and then finally 10. Now, the whole time, God knows exactly what's going to happen, exactly how many righteous people are there. He's showing Abraham that he is not acting rashly. He's showing Abraham that he is not acting unrighteously. We don't serve a God who is unrighteous and who is not just. Abraham is essentially saying, is it really justice if you kill the righteous with the wicked? And God knows all along that he's going to spare the righteous. And he also knows how many righteous there are to spare. And so this is an exercise that is truly for the learning of Abraham and for our learning by reading it about how God is not going to exercise his power.
You know, when Abraham made the last remark he did, it was almost like he had a weak apology there. You know, he said, do not let the Lord be angry.
Well, he knew he was pushing his luck.
Yeah, but it's also a good lesson there. You think a lot of times when you pray to God, God's going to answer you in his time, not ours. You sometimes become weak in your faith. And that's here, then we, at that point in time, really feel like Abraham did, Lord, don't be angry with me for asking this prayer again. To me, that's
Yep.
a lesson you can learn there.
Sure.
God.
Sure. And in fact, it happens twice. Well, probably more than twice, but twice clearly, I guess I'll say it that way. Back in verse 30, oh, may the Lord not be angry, and shall I speak? Suppose 30 are found there. Verse 31, now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. And I have ventured to speak to the Lord, meaning what? He said, I've been so bold to come to you over and over again and to ask you for more and more. But I'm going to do it yet again. And then finally he gets down to, oh, may the Lord not be angry in verse 32. And I shall speak only this once. I love that. That reminds me of children. It really does. One more time. Which really means what? You're the parent of a toddler. What does one more time mean? Just keep going into infinity. There's always one. And He had already spoke to him multiple times, just this once. But what he's saying is, you know what, I'm going to push it this far, just this one time. 10. And God says,
that's the reason that my thoughts about that is orientation of God and our own understanding and our realization that as Abraham is speaking with God there, the only way we speak to God is through our prayers. And
Yep.
He's not going to speak back to us except through His Word. And so I still feel like the lesson we learned there.
oh yeah.
Great patience that God has.
And it's a good lesson in terms of our prayers. Can we repeatedly ask things? Is it okay? God didn't strike him dead. In fact, God did what? He bargained with him. He listened to him, and he consented. Okay, yeah, I'll do that. Well, then let me ask this. Well, okay, I'll do that. Well, I've been so bold as to do this. Don't get angry with me, but let me make this one more request. Okay, I'll do that. And it just goes on and on and on. And the Lord, finally, look at verse 33, and this is where we want to see the significance here. As soon as he had finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed. And Jehovah's gone. And Abraham returned to his place. Now the 2 angels came to Sodom. There were 3. One of them was the Lord. The Lord departs. Now there are 2. Two angels, they're now identified as messengers, came as Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed down with his face to the ground, and he said, Now behold, my lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way. They said, however, no, but we shall spend the night in the square. Okay, I want to stop right there and just make the observation. Lot learned from I guess, Abraham and the rest of the family and Abraham's brother, which was Lot's father, to be just as hospitable as Abraham was. Lot's immediate response to these 2 strangers is what? To show them respect and to invite them to his home and to provide for them the way to refresh themselves and a night's sleep in his home. This is a very hospitable man. And they say, no, we're going to stay in the square. Yet he urged them strongly. So they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he prepared a feast for them. Look, that's the exact same thing Abraham did, right? He prepared a feast for them, baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter, and they called to Lot and said to him, Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may have relations with them. Some translations say that we may know them. I want you to understand that when you talk about knowing someone in the biblical sense, it's talking about having relations, carnal knowledge. Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind him. So there's a mob that's assembled outside of his house. They are demanding the strangers. Lot walks outside, closes the door behind him, puts himself in between the mob and the strangers who have taken up temporary quarters at his house. And he says, Please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with man. Please let me bring them out to you and do to them whatever you like. Only do nothing to these men inasmuch as they have come under the shelter of my roof. This is a very difficult thing. It's very perplexing. All I can say is this does not suggest that Lot likes what he's suggesting. This does not suggest that Lot thinks that this is good. This is suggesting that Lot feels like his duty to these strangers is so great that he's willing to sacrifice to protect them. Greater love has no one than this, but that he was lay down his own life for his brother. He stopped a little bit short of that. He's offering 2 of his daughters to protect these men. Yes.
I have a feeling that he knew maybe about 95% of the men were going to want the daughters, so he thought he would extend himself.
Yeah,
The angels saying that.
Yeah, I don't know. All I know is what's here, and it is hard to wrestle with. But it's the solution he came up with at the spur of the moment. They said, stand aside. Furthermore, they said, this one came in as an alien. Speaking of Lot, Lot was a foreigner. Now, he had lived there for a long time, and he was an important man. We know that. We know he was rich. We know that. Where was he found at the beginning of this chapter? Sitting at the city gates. Who sat at the city gates? The important, powerful people of the city. That's where the elders of a city sat, and they discussed the things that were going on, and it made decisions about what should be done, and people came for judgment and advice. He was among the leaders of this city, but now they say, hey, you've come in as an outsider, and you want to make a judge, make yourself a judge over us? We will treat you worse than them. So they pressed hard against Lot and came near to break the door. And we're going to have to stop there because time is escaping. We do have a little bit of time. If anybody has any questions or comments they want to make about what's going on here in Sodom at this point.
The only last comment I make about Lot's solution is pretty hard to digest.
It is. It's hard. It's hard to, I don't know. It's just hard.
It's similar to sacrificing.
Granted, Jesus is my plea, daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Through this world of toil and snares, if I falter, Lord, who cares? Who with me my burden shares? None but thee, dear Lord, none but thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea, daily walking close to thee.